Okay, so in this video, we're going to be working through exercise 3J, which is all about tables and rules. What are our learning intentions? To understand that a rule connects two varying quantities, to be able to complete an input-output table given a rule, and to be able to find a rule in the form this for an input-output table. Okay, let's just begin by going through a little bit of theory here. So, what is our theory? A rule shows the relationship between two varying quantities. A table of values can be created for any given rule. To complete a table of values, we start with the first input number and use the rule to calculate the corresponding output number. We do this for each input number in the table. And replacing the input with a number is known as substitution. Okay, so there's a lot of words there, and you're probably thinking, what on earth does all of that mean? Well, let's hopefully make sure that this makes sense having gone through an example. So this all will make sense having gone through this example here. Okay, so example 1, completing a table. So it says complete each table for the given rule. Now this right here, this is our rule, and I want you to write that in. I want you to write rule. This is our rule, because you're going to hear that word a lot, and you need to know that this is the rule. And based on this rule, we can complete this table of values. This is an input-output table. So as you can see, we have an input row and we have an output row. And using the rule, we can fill this out. Okay, so that's the first one. We know what a rule is. We now have seen a table of values. This is the table of values. Now, how can we use our rule to fill out our table of values? Well, right here it says to complete a table of values, we start with the first input number. So our first input number is 1. And it says, and use the rule to calculate the corresponding output number. So we can now figure out what the corresponding output number is going to be based on our input number. It says we do this for each input number in the table, and it's done by replacing the input with the number. Replacing the input with a number is known as substitution. So the way in which we do this is by substitution. Okay, so let's just pause for a second and look at our rule more closely and see the parts of it. So obviously we have the output, and that is this. So the output is that, and we're trying to figure out what our first output number is going to be. We also have the input section of our rule. So this is the input section, which corresponds to 1 in this case. Now, the other important part of our rule is the fact that we have a +3, which means whatever our input is, we're going to +3 to it in order to get our output. And sometimes the way I like to visualize this is as a machine. So our rule kind of acts as a machine. We have our input number. Our input number is 1 in this case. It's our input number. We put our input number into our machine. So this is our rule. So now we're going to get 1. And remember, our rule tells us that we have to +3 to it, as it says here, +3. So we're going to get 1 + 3. And 1 + 3 is 4. So that means 4 is our output. So just like a real machine, a real machine has an input and an output. Well, so too this. We have our input, which is 1. We put our input into our rule, and we get out our output, which is 4. So that means that right here is going to be 4. We can also think of this in terms of substitution. So think for a moment. We have 1. We put 1 into our input. So we're going to have 1 here. We have this +3. What's 1 + 3? It's equal to 4. And that's how we got it. That's how we got this 4 right here. Well, let's now do our next one. So for our next input, we have 2. So this time, as you can see, we have this 2 input. So we're going to put 2 into our machine here, 2. And our machine says, hey, we need a +3 to this thing. So we +3, just as our rule tells us. And what we end up getting out is going to be 2 + 3, which is 5, which means 5 is our output. So that output is 5. Our output is 5. It's 5, which corresponds to our output here. So again, the way that you should be thinking about this is in terms of substitution. So this time I'm taking this 2 and I'm substituting it into the input value because it's our input, and I'm going to get 2 + 3, which is equal to 5. And that's why there's a 5 there. Now, when you're doing these things, you're not actually going to draw a little machine. Rather, what you're going to do is say, all right, I have 3. So it means I'm going to put 3 into my output, into my input, and I'm going to plus 3 to it. 3 plus 3 is 6. So 6 is my output. Then for the next one, you're going to go 4 is my input. So I put 4 here. I plus 3 to it. 4 plus 3 is 7. So that means 7 is here. And just like that, we have completed this table of values using our given rule. Let's now go through another example. So once again, we're given a rule. So this is our rule. And we're going to use our rule to fill in this table of values. So our first input is 3. So what you're going to think is I'm going to put 3 into my machine. Now my machine is timesing it by 4. So it's going to be 3 times 4, and that's 12. So that means 12 is my output. And remember, the way that you're really going to think about this is in terms of substitution. You're taking this 3 and you're putting it into the input because it is our input. So it's going to be 3 times 4, and 3 times 4 is 12. Next, you're going to move to your next input, which is 5. So you're putting 5 into the machine. The machine is saying times it by 4. So therefore, you're going to get 20 out. 20 out. And again, you're going to think of this in terms of substitution. 5 is your input. You're timesing it by 4. 5 times 4 is 20. Let's do the next one. So next is 12. So you're going to put 12 into your input spot. You're going to times it by 4, and you're going to get 48 out. So you put 48 as the output value. Next is 20. So you put 20 in the input spot. You times it by 4. 20 times 4 is going to be 80. So that means you put 80 there. And just like that, we have completed our table of values. We used our rule to do this. So hopefully that first page makes perfect sense, because now we're going to move on to our next page, which says, complete each for the given rule. So here we have an input-output table, just as we did before. We've got the same instructions, but now our rule, so this is our rule looks a little bit different. But do not fear, we know exactly what we're going to do here. We're going to take this first input value, and we're going to substitute it into our rule, which means we're going to have 2 times, now our input is 2. Then we're going to plus 1 to it. Now 2 times 2 is 4. Remember, we do this first because of the brackets. 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5. So that means my output is going to be 5. So I put 5 here. Next, I take my 3 and I put it into my input. So it's going to be 2 times 3 plus 1. 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7. So that means 7 goes here, because 7 is my output. Next, we have 4. So I put 4 into my input spot. 2 times 4, then I plus 1. 2 times 4 is 8, plus 1 is 9. So 9 goes here. Next I have 5. So I'm going to have 2 times 5 plus 1. 2 times 5 is 10, plus 1 is 11. So that means 11 goes into this spot. And just like that, I have completed my table of values. Okay, let's now move on to the next one. So here it is. You might like to pause the video and give this one a go for yourself. So let's give it a go now. So we have 8 times our input minus 5. Okay, so we're going to go 8 times our first input is 1. So we put a 1 here, then we minus 5. Now 8 times 1 is 8, minus 5 is 3. So that means 3 is my first output. Next we have 2, so we're going to put 2 into our input spot. And that means we're going to get 8 times 2 minus 5. Now 8 times 2 is 16. 16 minus 5 is 11. So this will be 11, and 11 will be my output. Next I have 5 as my input. So I'm going to have 8 times 5. Then I'm going to subtract 5 from that. 8 times 5 is 30. 30 minus 5, sorry, let me say that again. 8 times 5 is 40. 40 minus 5 is 35. So this will be 35. Okay, the next one that we have is 7. So 7 is my input. We just need a bit more space here. So I'm going to go 8 times 7 minus 5. Now, 8 times 7 is 56. 56 minus 5 is going to be 51. So 51 is going to go here. Next is 10. I might have to come all the way down here now. So 10 is going to be 8 times 10 minus 5. 8 times 10 is going to be 80, minus 5 is going to be 75. So that means 75 is going to go in this spot right here. That's going to be 75. Okay, so having now gone through all of those, let's now move on to our next idea. So here it says, find a rule for a table of values. So this is example 2, find a rule from a table of values. Often a rule can be determined from a table of values. On close inspection of the values, a relationship may be observed. Each 4 operations should be considered when looking for a connection. So we need to find a rule for each of these tables of values. Okay, so let's come down here and let's see if we can figure out what these are going to be. So we need to find the rule for each of these tables of values. So unlike before, so over here, we had been given the rule and we had to complete the table of values. But now we have been given the completed table of values and we need to figure out what the rule is going to be. So we need to figure out, how is my input related to my output? Well, if I have 3 and 12, well, 12 minus 3, that's equal to 9. And 4 and 13, well, 13 minus 4 is also equal to 9. And what about 5 and 14? Well, 14 minus 5 is also equal to 9. So it's quite clear that I'm plussing 9. I'm plussing 9 each time. So that means my rule would be my output equals my input plus 9. That would be my rule. I'm taking my input, I'm plussing it by 9 to get my output. Let's now come to our next one. For our next one here, how are we going to figure out the relationship between our input and our output? Well, here I have 1 and here I have 7. Here I have 2 and here I have 14. Here I have 3, here I have 21. It's quite clear what I'm doing. I'm multiplying by 7. I'm multiplying by 7, and sure enough, 4 to 28 is times 7. 5 to 35 is times 7. So these ones, you figure them out by inspection, and that's actually the word that's used up here. You're figuring them out by inspection. So where is that word? Inspection. So you're just looking at it and you're trying to figure out what's going on. So here our output is going to be equal to our input times 7. So when I times my input by 7, I'm going to get out my output. Perfect. Let's keep on going now. Here it says, find the rule for each of these tables of values. Okay, so this is the same thing. We have to figure out what our rule is going to be. And we're just going to look closely and inspect. Well, here I have 10 and here I have 5. Here I have 11, here I have 6, here I have 12, here I have 7. So it's quite clear that if I go 10 minus 5, that's going to be 5. If I go 11 minus 6, that's also going to be 5. 12 minus 7 is also going to be 5. So it's quite clear that I'm subtracting 5 from my input each time. So that means my output is going to be equal to my input minus 5. So I'm taking my input and I'm subtracting 5 from it. I'm taking my input and I'm subtracting 5 from it. Let's now look over here. Here I have 2, here I have 12, here I have 3, here I have 18, here I have 4, here I have 24. Well, it's quite clear that 2 times 6 is equal to 12. 3 times 6 is equal to 18. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking my input, and I'm multiplying it by 6. And that would be my rule. So my output equals my input times 6. Perfect. All right, so those two now are done. Let's now look at our final two. So here we have our input and our output. And as you can see here, we have 2 to 5. Then we have 3 to 7. Then we have 4 to 9. So what is exactly linking these together? Well, 2 to 5, if I was to plus 3 here, I would get to 5. For this one, let me zoom in a bit more. If I was to plus 4, that would work. For this one, I'd have to plus 5. And then for this one, I would have to plus 6. then for this one, I would have to plus 7. As you can see, there isn't a constant number being added to it, and there doesn't seem to be a constant number being multiplied to it either. What you're going to notice after a while, and this again is through inspection, so I might even write that word down, inspection. This is how we're really doing it. And in my mind, I'm thinking, hey, if I take 2 and I multiply it by 2, that gives me 4. And then if I plus 1 more to it, it gives me 5. And that's my output. So too over here, if I take 3 and I multiply it by 2, that gives me 6. And then if I plus 1 to it, it gives me 7. And that's exactly what we have here. For the next one, if I take 4 and I multiply 2, it gives me 8. And if I plus 1, it gives me 9. And that's what we have there. So again, I'm noticing this by inspection. So that means now if I want to write down what my answer is going to be, it's going to be my output equals my input. Sorry, let me try that again. It's going to be my output, brackets, input, times 2 plus 1. So first I'm multiplying my input by 2. That's why I have these brackets here. And then I'm plussing 1 to my answer. Perfect. All right, our very last question here. So again, we're trying to determine what the rule is going to be. So here I have 2, here I have 17, here I have 3, here I have 27. And you might actually like to pause the video here and see if you can figure this one out for yourself. What you really have to notice here is that I have 7 here, I have 7 here, I have 7 here, I have 7 here, I have 7 here. That's interesting. And then, again, this is by inspection. So it's kind of a hard idea to teach because just having done enough of these, you'll pick it up. So once you've done your exercise and you've gone through these enough, you'll start to pick up clues from here and there. It's quite clear that what's happening here, take our first one, is I'm going 2 times 10, which is equal to 20, and then I'm subtracting 3 from it, and that's giving me 17. So that's how I got 17 here. Over here, I'm taking 3 times 10, and that's giving me 30. Then I'm subtracting 3 from it, and it's giving me 27, and that's how I'm getting that. So I'm timesing my input by 10, and then I'm subtracting 3 from it. So I would say that my output equals, brackets, my input times 10 minus 3. And that would be my answer. So my output equals my input times 10, then subtract 3 from it. And that's how I'm getting all my values there. Okay, so with that being said, hopefully all of this made sense to you and you now feel comfortable with all these ideas. Let's just quickly run through our learning intentions. Do you understand what a rule is? Do you understand what an input-output table is? And do you feel comfortable in determining rules as well? Okay, with that being said, I'll see you in the next lesson.